I don't know a lot of what you know around the theory of what you've got me here to talk about. I stood as a local member of parliament and wanted to be a local member of parliament, and that was about it. I felt there were some issues where my communities in Port Macquarie and Taree and Kempsey weren't being addressed. I felt our communities weren't very organised in getting those issues addressed. They weren't empowered into the main game of politics, both at a state and federal level, and felt that if we could do some work in bringing everyone together, then in many ways we could answer a lot of the questions ourselves through our own work and just get some gentle support from government to get there. So that was where I started, and then this whole journey through politics took place over those 17 years and finished with a bang over those final 3 years of the 43rd Federal Parliament and the one seat Parliament that the Senate is now living now in the 44th, kind of ironically, as a response to how terrible the 43rd was. It would be very easy to be like all other politicians and pick a hospital or pick a school and some bricks and mortar and try and put your name to it, or a road. There's heaps of that stuff. It would be easy to pick a piece of legislation that you've promoted through the Parliament. You know, that's been done and was fun. It would be easy to talk about the 43rd Parliament and just keeping that show on its feet as a challenge all of its own, and 500 pieces of legislation that went through there, and the thousands of stories that are wrapped up in that period. But the one that, if I'm being honest, I talk about is an email I received in what were my final weeks after I'd announced I was leaving, and it was from someone who is on FBI radio in Sydney. Does anyone know it? Yep. And she used to live in Port Macquarie, and in 2008 there was some youth allowance changes proposed by the then Deputy Prime Minister Julia Gillard to try and resolve some issues and get some better structures for regional students in access to youth allowance. At that time, it was going to severely impact coastal communities which weren't considered part of regional communities and therefore were getting shut out. We did some community roundtables and brought in a couple of really impressive Year 11 and Year 12 students who formed their own committee. Two of them took the lead on the issue, and I can name them, Jess O'Callaghan and Heidi Pett, who, if you listen to FBI radio, they're both now there on a regular basis. And I dragged them down to Canberra, and they basically lobbied on behalf of our community for changes to the youth allowance package that would benefit not only our community, but many of these fringe communities that were just getting cut out of some of those youth allowance changes, which would have a huge impact on our already very low access to higher education. They won the day. They basically rounded other communities to do the same, have a couple of articulate young people to come to Canberra. They built a group then around Australia and a network. They lobbied the corridors, and so with some very gentle direction and just providing these Year 11 and 12 students those points of contact, where to go, how to do it, they did it. And they got the changes and succeeded. And so move that forward from 2008 to 2013 when I announced I was leaving, to get an email then 5 years later from those guys to say, look, that had a huge impression on our lives. We even notice amongst our friends, now we live in Sydney, how we talk about politics completely differently to how they talk about politics. We feel we can make a difference, we can engage in the process, and that the political process is one where if you participate, if you're smart about your strategy, you can make a difference. And so, that big nice thank you email is my highlight of my time, my whole time in politics, because I think it's the nature of, I think, why you've dragged me here today, and that is that cultural change at a community level, empowering community to engage in the process to achieve outcomes of a sustainable nature. That was one little part of a strategy that I wasn't sure about when I went into federal politics particularly, but I was willing to invest in it and was really pleased I did, because I now am the firmest of advocates, and that is the place-based model of thinking. And that, you know, there's so many variations of that theme, and there's probably theories that you know more about than I do, but it's that bottom-up versus the top-down approach to political and community engagement. When I was elected federally, I was a state member watching a Howard government in its last years come in pretty hard with a bit of a Teachers Federation busting package of Australian technical colleges. And so again, I don't know whether everyone, well, I hope if I'm talking to a room full of mostly teachers, that period from about 2006 to 2008, those Australian technical colleges were being put in around Australia. 2 went into the Lion electorate, 1 in Taree, 1 in Port Macquarie. The one in Port Macquarie was taken on by the Catholic Church. It's about 400 metres from the local airport. John Howard came to open it at the end of 2007, and that 400-metre drive, there were people jumping on the cars, teachers spitting, you know, at the car. It got pretty outrageous in, you know, just the behaviour of everyone. People lying on the road in front of the car, you know, just that whole active protest was on in a big way. That had me thinking, and so a year later when I came in to politics, this place-based model was one I really wanted to give a run, and with largely the executive officer for the North Coast Institute of TAFE, who I knew personally, we decided to pull together a round table of everyone, so all sectors, secondary, vocational, tertiary, and all providers, so Catholic, independent and public. To get them around the one table at the one time took about 6 months of badgering. You know, it was an enormous exercise at a local community level, particularly on the back of, you know, the squabble over that 400-metre drive that had gone on 6 months before. But we got there, and what happened over 3 or 4 meetings was people actually started to talk to each other. What was really noticeable in the first meeting was, even though these were local providers in a community of roughly around 55,000 people, people hadn't even met each other. And you know, they had no connection whatsoever, if they were particularly in the different streams, the Catholic, independent and public streams. There was just you know, a war mentality against each other. Everyone was looking over the fence at what the other one was doing without actually having to talk to each other about how, you know, everyone can improve education locally together. So over those meetings, we didn't actually have to do much other than actually get them there, and eventually they started to talk to each other. Eventually they started to talk about resolving some of the issues together, and eventually they started to cut some deals together and develop some partnerships, which was fascinating to watch. And then it was a very easy approach to levels of government to say, look, all the local providers have come together to say this, with a little bit of money, will you give us a hand? And it made it really difficult for government to say no. From that, not only did things like the youth allowance package nationally, in my view, get addressed, and so you know, there is a much better youth allowance package of over $230 million annually that's changed from 2008 to today, engaging many more regional and rural students as a consequence. But the same could be said about those bricks and mortar projects. I'm really excited that Port Macquarie now is having a joint health education facility being built, which is a unique regional model where all those traditional TAFE courses, the midwifery, I don't even know them all, feet, all the different parts of the body, all those courses that get taught, are all being done on the very same campus as the first full medicine degree from first to sixth year delivered in regional Australia. And so there's no, oh, they're doctors there off in Sydney or University of New South Wales or wherever. Everyone's in there together and working side by side, learning together. And the secondary benefit of that is the medical shortage in a regional community over time will hopefully also get addressed through that learning experience and that joint health facility. So that's something that just grew from people talking to each other and coming together and working together instead of within the education sector fighting each other. So they're the two, the model of place-based is, I think, a model that hopefully will be replicated. And from that, empowering individuals and empowering communities is, I'm left as the greatest of advocates for that model. It saddens me to hear the ongoing answer coming from above. And in my view, we've had it from both sides of politics, and culturally it continues to be the norm, particularly at a federal level, trying to drive reform from above for the greater good. Personally, I don't think that's a sustainable model, and personally I don't think that is a way to address some very serious inequities that have been built into our education systems in Australia today. And I was promising myself I wouldn't say that if you buy the book, you will see a whole chapter on the importance of collaboration and pathways. And it is only through everyone coming together that those pathways and that student focus can happen. In our community, and it's not unusual for a regional community, if you think of those Bradley targets of 40% by 2025, having a bachelor degree or higher between the age groups of 25 and 35, I think, correct me on the edges. The electorate of Lyne was 12% when I started. We are massively short, and that is not unusual in regional and rural Australia. So there is inequity built into the system that we've got to find ways to address, and I think it's the place-based model is the way to do it.